And a strike is when a group of workers organize against their employer, oftentimes to fight for lower wage, or excuse me, higher wages, working shorter hours in safer working environments. Okay, and one of the most famous strikes that occurs in the late 1800s is the Homestead Strike, which occurs in Homestead, PA, right outside of Pittsburgh, PA, in one of Andrew Carnegie's steel mills in Homestead. Okay, and the group of workers, they were unhappy with their unsafe working conditions. They knew that Henry Ford and his partner Henry Frick could afford to pay them a lot higher of a wage for the work they were doing. Okay, and once they found out about that, they decided to go on strike. They refused to show up for work, and they stood outside of the factory, and they wouldn't allow Andrew Carnegie and Henry Frick to replace them with new replacements. They were standing outside the factory, protesting, blocking anybody from entering it, okay, to prove their point that they deserved higher wages and their work hours needed to be shortened. All right. But what Andrew Carnegie ends up doing, he hires a detective agency known as the Pinkerton Detective Agency, and Pinkerton Private Detective Agency goes in and opens fire amongst the steel workers who are on strike. Okay, and once they begin doing that, the workers decide to stop their strike and return to work. All right. So the major impact that the Homestead Strike had on steelworkers and their attempt to unionize was that it was really a major defeat for them. Okay, and it was a setback for them to successfully unionize. Right, they didn't get the respect that they were trying to get from Andrew Carnegie and the rest of the managers of the Carnegie Steel Company. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Pullman strike now. So it was another major strike that occurred during this time. And the workers wanted the same thing as the steel workers who were part of the Homestead Strike wanted, right? They wanted their union to be recognized as a legitimate group of workers fighting for better conditions in their work environment, right? They wanted higher wages, and the workers who are part of the Pullman strike, they're working on the railroad all throughout the western part of the United States. Okay, they are building the railroad cars that travel along all the western railroad track, right? And they're going to be living in this town created by the owner of the railroad car producing company. Now, his name's Pullman. Hence why it's called the Pullman strike. And they also wanted a reduction in their living expenses while they were living in that town. So that was the other thing they advocated for. But what happens is our government actually gets involved in this strike, the national government. So it makes it the whole way up there. And they're going to put an end to the strike. And they're going to put an end to the Pullman strike organized by the railroad workers by calling in the national military. Okay, so they're going to call in the United States Army to prevent these workers from continuing the strike. And that's when it ultimately ends. Okay, so what happens is it's another failed attempt at another group of workers to organize, right? In this case, similar to the steel workers and the Homestead strike, the railroad workers and the Pullman strike are also going to fail. Okay, but the Pullman strike is a really big deal. Okay, it's going to be written about all over the country in newspapers. Okay, it's a very popular event. Everybody's going to know about it. It catches a lot of national attention. All right, so these progressives that are fighting for better working conditions, they're fighting to put an end to child labor. Okay, it's a group of people that emerge throughout the United States. Okay, so it's sort of a political movement. Um, and it consists of a bunch of well-educated individuals, right? Many of these progressives, they're going to have college degrees. They're going to work professional jobs. Okay, they're going to take a really pragmatic approach. Okay, these progressive journalists, especially, right? They want to establish, kind of a sense of right in society. They want to put an end to segregation and Jim Crow laws. They want to allow women to vote. They want to put an end to child labor. They want to create safer and fairer work environments for all workers across the United States. All right. And these muckrakers who are progressive journalists, they're people like Lewis Hine, right? We took a look at a lot of his photos of children working in coal mines. Upton St. Clair is another famous progressive journalist, also known as a muckraker, who highlights the negative practices of the meatpacking industry in Chicago in his book Jungle, which was published in 1906. Okay. So, the major impact of all these progressives, especially the muckraker journalists, is that they're going to improve safety conditions for workers. So, as a result of all the muckrakers who wrote about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, that event's going to catch the attention of the government. And what the government's going to do is, hey, we need to make these factories safer for workers. We need to make these businesses implement safe practices. So they have a fire evacuation plan. So workers aren't standing so close to one another when they're operating heavy machinery, hiring the chances of them accidentally bumping each other and an injury happening, right? So they made businesses implement safety protocols after that. They're also going to convince the government to place some restrictions on the amount of workers, on the amount of hours workers are allowed to work. Okay. And they're going to get the government to place restriction on child labor as well. Now, how they do that? They're going to make everybody in the United States aware of what the workplace is like for the average American, right? And some Americans, they're in better workplaces than others, right? But getting this information out there to a majority of America, it leads to a majority of America putting pressure on our government to do something about it, okay? And when a majority of America wants something done, wants to end something like child labor, okay, and the government refuses to do it, what happens to the government? Well, they get voted out of office and replaced by somebody that is willing to do something on child labor, right? And a lot of members of our United States government, they knew that during this time, right? If they didn't do anything about child labor, they were going to get voted out of office. So a lot of them, they choose to advocate to put an end to child labor. And ultimately, the appropriate legislation is created that places restrictions on children working in factories. All right. And that will be it for our discussion today. Make sure you complete the labor union's activity. It mainly focuses on the Homestead strike and the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory tragedy. Until then, I will see you next time. Enjoy the rest of your day.